What if the word incel was not meant to provoke fear, disgust, or derision, but simply to name a kind of pain that really hasn't had the room to breathe? You see, not every man who identifies with the term incel is filled with rage, and not every incel hates women, and not every incel wants revenge. But the thing is, every incel by definition has one thing in common, and that is they're carrying this ache of unwantedness. And that ache, when it's ignored long enough, it can start to harden into bitterness, into shame, and even into hopelessness. The story we often hear about incels is one of threat. They're a big threat. News stories link them to violence. Forums are scanned for hatred. And yes, there's real danger in some corners of these communities that absolutely must be addressed. But if we only look at the fringes, at the very edges, these stories, if we never look at the center, we tend to miss something absolutely vital. Because at the center of the incel experience is often a deep, raw yearning for intimacy, and for love, for closeness, for proof that they matter, not just to someone, but to anyone. See, the very word involuntary reveals that this isn't a choice. These are not people who are rejecting connection. They feel like they've been rejected by it. But how does someone get to the point of identifying as an incel? For the most part, it doesn't start with an ideology. No, instead it starts with rejection. A lot of it, like early on, in ways that begin to feel very personal. For some, it was the moment that they first realized that no one made eye contact with them in class. For others, it's when they got laughed at, when they try to express interest in a connection. Maybe it was the dating app messages that were left unread, or the silence, or the cold, the birthday that no one remembered in their circle. And over time, these experiences add up. And over time, these small moments begin to create a storyline that says, I must not be attractive, or no one wants me, or there's something wrong with me inherently. And eventually, many come to believe this, and they say things like, I'm doomed to be alone, not just now, but forever. And you see, that belief can be unbearable on its own. But what makes it even worse is how invisible it often feels. There's no cultural space to grieve romantic isolation. If you're poor, people can sympathize with you. If you're sick, they can support you. But if you say that you're lonely, especially as a man, it can feel like you're breaking a rule. You're supposed to shrug it off. You're supposed to pretend it doesn't matter. Just focus on yourself, bro, right? Grind harder, work on your own confidence. And so this pain festers, this ache continues to stew. And when a man is constantly told that he shouldn't care about his romantic rejection, but he still feels its sting, well, then he begins to wonder what's wrong with him for even hurting in the first place. And in that confusion, he finds others who feel the same way. People who speak the same language. It's an unspoken language of frustration. People who echo the same unanswered questions and frustrations. People who offer an explanation, something along the lines of maybe we're all just incels. And it feels like truth. It feels like clarity and like a diagnosis. And in some ways it is, but that's only the beginning, isn't it? Because wrapped inside that label is something deeper. It's this longing for connection that is so persistent, so powerful, and its absence, it's unbearable. It's not the sex ultimately that defines the ache of the incel experience. It's instead the disconnection. It's the quiet, the exclusion from the world of closeness, of shared inside jokes, of someone reaching out for your hand in the dark. So this episode, like everyone in this upcoming bonus series, in addition to our current one, The Bridge Back to Us, is not about endorsing the hate. It's not about coddling harmful behavior. No, it's about reaching for what lies underneath. To ask not just what someone believes, but also why do they believe it? To walk slowly enough to hear the questions that are underneath the rage. The loneliness under the memes, the heartbreak behind the mask that they're wearing. And so we begin here. We begin here by looking at the word incel, not just as an insult, but as a wound that is finally getting named. Not as a threat, but as a signal or a flare that says, I didn't choose this, but I can't escape this either. And most of all, we're going to begin here with a sense of our shared humanity. See, we all want to be seen. We all long to be chosen. We all ache to belong in some significant way. And sometimes when those needs go unmet for too long, they start to twist and they begin to calcify. They can turn into rage, into judgment, into bitter philosophies. But underneath that twisting root is a seed of need, a need that still matters, a need that has not gone away. So that's what this episode will explore. What happens when someone doesn't just feel alone, but actually builds their identity around this sense of feeling alone? What does it do to a man to walk through life believing that he is and he always will be unlovable? And what would it take for all of us to make sure that no one ever has to feel that way again? You see, it's easy to dismiss the pain when it's wrapped up in language that we don't quite understand. Harder still, though, when that pain is wrapped in anger. And yet, if we slow down, if we look carefully, we'll often find that behind even though the most bitter expressions is a plea, a cry out that says, "Won't you see me? See me." Incel forums are often dismissed as toxic wastelands, and oftentimes they are. But they are also archives of human longing. They are places where people say what they would never dare to say out loud. Places where the shame and the secrecy get traded for a kind of raw honesty, albeit filtered through despair. And if we listen past the noise, if we just give some time, we find men who feel bypassed by the very world they were told would welcome them. There's a recurring pattern in these spaces. It oftentimes starts with vulnerability. Someone who's describing another failed attempt at connection, another moment of invisibility someone experienced, or another experience of rejection that was often delivered with casual cruelty. And then others begin to respond to these experiences, sometimes with empathy, sometimes with sarcasm, but oftentimes with rage. And why this rage? Why this anger? Because for many in this community, pain has become unbearable. And in the absence of comfort, rage in some way feels like control. You see, if no one will soothe you, you might as well just armor up. If no one will care about you, you can just shout louder. If no one will see you as lovable, at least you can be seen as angry, which is a form of expression. And it's not healthy, it's not fair, but it makes a kind of emotional sense, doesn't it? When society offers men little space for vulnerability, the grief of loneliness has has nowhere to go. And so it transforms. It transforms into memes, into biting cynicism, into self-deprecating humor that's only half joking, into theories and rankings and labels, and for some, into ideologies that harden their pain into something that finally feels like they're getting their power back. But here's the truth that often gets missed. The incel label does not begin with a power grab. Instead, the incel experience begins with surrender. It's a word some use when they feel like nothing else has worked in their experience. It's the name they adopt when hope has stopped knocking on the door, when trying to fix themselves has left them more exhausted than a sense of feeling whole, when self-improvement has actually felt more like self-betrayal because no matter how hard they tried, the rejection just didn't stop. And they've gone to the gym, they've learned how to style themselves, they've read all the manuals and all the books and all the pamphlets, they've memorized conversation scripts. They've tried everything the world told them would make them in some way desirable, and they're still alone. It's at that point that the word incel can feel like the only honest word left. And yet, even this identity, raw as it is, it carries the fingerprints of longing. Longing for someone to say, you are more than your dating history. You're more than your jawline. You're more than the silence of your phone. But they rarely hear this. Not from the culture, not from their friends, their peers, not even from themselves. And so they cope. And in that coping, they construct explanations, systems, philosophies. If love won't come, at least give me a reason why. If I'm undesirable, at least tell me why. So the brain, it craves this sense of closure. And when that closure is absent, people will settle for certainty, even if that certainty is cruel. It's better to believe that I'm genetically doomed than to live in endless confusion, they say. Or it's better to believe that women are shallow than to actually believe that I'm truly unlovable. Or it's better to believe the world is broken than to believe that I'm invisible to the world. And that's where the ideology begins to take shape. Not as a first step, as something, but more like as a last resort. See, that's where the black pill thinking begins to rise up, this hopelessness, where the narrative shift from I'm lonely to I'm cursed, where it's from maybe it's me to maybe it's all of them. And it can become quite addictive because at least now there's a map, there's a story, there's a framework that they can operate off of. But frameworks can also become prisons, can't they? And the longer someone stays inside that framework, the harder it becomes to believe that anything else is real. So that's why this episode and this entire bonus series that I'm working on in tandem to our current series exists. Because the prison isn't just made of ideas, it's actually made of pain. And pain is something we all understand deeply, isn't it? That is, if we dare to. See, this isn't about justifying dangerous beliefs. No, it's about tracing them to their source. Because when we understand the pain that gives birth to this bitterness, we in essence gain the power to respond not just with correction, but also with compassion. There's a phrase that echoes through some of the incel spaces, and that is, you will never understand what it's like for us. But maybe if we Maybe if we try, we might get a little taste. Perhaps if we can just listen a little longer than we want to. Maybe if we are willing, we can see past the posturing. Maybe we can ask not why do you believe that, but what happened to make you feel that this is true? And and perhaps in that asking, something can shift. Because nobody chooses to feel unwanted. Nobody chooses isolation as their dream for their future. Nobody wakes up and says, I hope no one ever loves me. These are not these are not evil people. These are these are not villains. And these are not monsters in our society. These are men, fellow human beings with breath and backstories, with wounds that haven't quite found words yet, with hopes that they barely admit, and with questions that they've stopped asking because no one ever answered kindly. And it's not just about them. It's also about us too, isn't it? I mean, what kind of world are we building where longing becomes shameful, where having needs becomes perceived as a weakness, and where rejection becomes an identity? And and what kind of a world could we build if we did things just a wee bit differently? To build that different kind of a world, we must begin by acknowledging what so few people dare to say out loud, and that is loneliness hurts. Romantic loneliness is crushing. And chronic romantic loneliness can start to feel like a death sentence for so many of these who are experiencing it. Not because we're owed anyone's affection, but more so because as human beings, we are wired for intimacy. Not just for sex, but for closeness, for attunement, for being chosen and being known and being smiled at like we actually matter. See, when that doesn't happen, when actually it never happens, it does something to a person. It warps your mirror. It changes how you see yourself and how you interpret other people's actions around you and towards you, and how safe you feel in the world that you're in. And if you're told not to care, but you actually do care, then where do you go with that ache? This is the ache so many incel identified men are carrying. And it's not entitlement. It's not malicious. It's not demanding, but it's a desperation to be seen as worthwhile, worth loving, even just once. And when the world responds with mockery, when the world responds with disgust and hashtags like forever alone, and these are turned into punchlines, then what's left? Often it's only each other, the ones whom they can relate to in this despair. And whilst peer support can be powerful, the isolation feeding that isolation becomes an echo chamber, and it becomes a place where sadness is the norm, the worldview, where the only people who understand are the ones who are hurting just like you, and where healing starts to feel impossible because every attempt has failed before. So what does integrity offer us here? Integrity, as we define it, is, well, at least as we define it in this series, is the alignment, if you will. Integrity is the alignment between your internal values and your external actions. It's about living from what is real and not what is reactive. And for the incel identity, integrity asks what do you truly want beneath all the despair? Not what have you been told you're supposed to want, but what do you really want? Not what the forms have convinced you you'll never get, not the the bitterness and how that's tricked you into chasing after status, but at the very core, what does your heart, at its most honest frame, desire? Or what does it still hope for? Is it sex? Or is it closeness? Is it conquest or is it connection? Is it validation or is it a single person who just whispers something like, you matter? When we strip away the noise and when we scrape right down to the soul, integrity reveals the fracture. And that is that many incels are living lives that no longer reflect their deepest hopes because they've lost that belief that those hopes are even still possible. And this is where intimacy comes in. Intimacy, as we've been defining again in this series, is not about romance, it's not about sex or even about closeness. Intimacy is even far deeper. I describe it as intimacy. Intimacy. It's the radical act of allowing yourself to be seen vulnerably and authentically and without any of that armor that you've been carrying. But how do you practice intimacy when the world has only seen you as a threat? How do you risk being known when being rejected has in essence defined your entire experience? See, that's the bridge that this series is trying to build. To help incel identified men believe that intimacy is still possible. And then also in tandem to help the outside watching world to recognize that the integrity is still present beneath the pain that this community has. To help all of us to speak more gently and to listen more fully and approach each other with dignity instead of dismissal. Because dignity is where healing starts. When someone feels that their pain is valid, not because it's righteous, but because it's real, then they stop needing to scream through their distorted ideologies. When someone's loneliness is witnessed and not mocked, they stop needing to weaponize it. And when someone's desire to be chosen is honored and not shamed, it's then that they begin to choose themselves. And when someone who has internalized the incel-based label, when they start feeling like they're seen, the label might start to loosen its grip. And it's not because their life all of a sudden became perfect, but it's because their identity is no longer built on exclusion. One of the greatest lies embedded in the incel framework is this. It's if no one desires me, I therefore have no value. And this lie is so corrosive. It turns the human worth into a scoreboard. It reduces people to sex appeal. It teaches men that their dignity is conditional. But here's the truth. Your worth was not up for debate. It has never been up for debate. Your value is not determined by your dating history. You're not a failed man because you're alone. And you're not less than because you've been rejected. This is true even if no one ever tells you this. This is true even if the pain feels unbearable. This is true even if the incel label feels like it's the only one that fits. Because you are still worthy of love. You're still worthy of respect, and you're still worthy of softness. You're still worthy of your own healing. And the journey forward does not begin with fixing your appearance. It doesn't begin with becoming high value. Instead it begins with begins with reclaiming the belief that you are allowed to want connection. And that is a beautiful experience. And that the world would be better if you got to have and experience this connection. It begins with giving yourself permission to hope again, even if it's just a flicker, even if even if it, even if it feels like betrayal to the bitterness that you've harbored for so long, even if it terrifies you more than you want to admit. Hope is hope is not weakness. Hope is not a coping strategy. Hope is actually the bridge that brings us back to each other. And and we are meant to walk through this together. Hope is what asks you to step up and do something brave for yourself. It asks you to try again, to re-enter this world that has hurt you, to risk being seen when all you've ever known is being overlooked. Hope asks you to speak honestly when silence has felt far safer. And for those of us who identify as incels, that's no small ask. Because for many, it feels like they've already tried everything, and in trying everything, nothing has worked. They were kind, they were persistent, they got in shape, right? They read every guide that they could get their hands on. They mimicked confidence. They swallowed their hurts. And still, after all this, there was nothing. And so what do you do when hope feels dangerous? When trying again feels like setting yourself up just to be crushed? Well, you shift the question. You shift the question. So instead of asking, how can I make someone choose me? Instead, consider asking, how can I live like I matter, even if no one else says that to me first? This is the core invitation of integrity. Not to abandon the desire for love and experiencing connection, but to stop outsourcing your worth, whether or not you receive it externally. To, in essence, realign your actions with your deepest values and not your worst fears. To live in a way that says, even if I've been ignored, I'm refusing to ignore myself. See, that's the real revolution right there. Because when men stop seeing themselves as only desirable if they're wanted by others, when they begin to live from a place of quiet self-honoring, they stop needing to fight the world for proof that they matter. And that shift doesn't erase the loneliness, but it does transform it. It turns the isolation into solitude. And it takes the bitterness and turns it into boundaries. It takes the desperation and transposes it into dignity. Now, it's still painful, but it's no longer defining you. And here's what makes that shift possible. It's intimacy. Intimacy not with someone else, well, I mean, not at least at first, but first with yourself. Intimacy with yourself. What if the first person who you became truly close to was yourself? What if you saw your own pain without flinching? What if you gave your own story the compassion that it's been starving for all this time? What if you finally said to yourself that the thing that no one else has ever said to you, and that is, I see you and you are not broken. Because here's the secret that most men never get told. Being whole, or that sense of wholeness, is not the absence of rejection. It's not the presence of romance in your life. It's not being chosen by others. Wholeness actually is living in alignment with what matters most to you, even if no one else affirms that thing that you value yet. Wholeness is integrity, and wholeness is it's possible, even for those who've been told that they're too far gone. Even for those whose pain has already calcified into cynicism. Even for those who've worn the label incel, not just as a description, but as a destiny. So you are not your label. You are not your loneliness. You're not the sum of who didn't want you. My dear listener, you are a human being. You're a fellow human being. You are still here. And that means your story has not ended yet. Your story isn't over. So imagine with me something, if you would. Just let's imagine together, what could life become if the incel label was no longer a sentence, but instead just a signal that something needs healing, that something went unsaid, and that something still matters deeply. Would you imagine with me a world where we don't punish longing, where we don't mock unmet needs, where we refuse to exile people because of their ache? Imagine with me what a culture would look like where men can say, "I'm feeling lonely," and the room doesn't fall silent. Where self-worth isn't built on body parts or on dating scores. Where connection is not earned through attempts at perfection, but instead it's extended through common kinship and our common humanity. I want to imagine what that bridge looks like. And I want to build that bridge, and I want to invite you to build that bridge with me as you listen to this series, one episode at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment at a time, as we consider what radical compassion looks like in practice as we come to understand this community. This episode was never about condoning the harm. It's instead about confronting despair with gentleness and saying to anyone who needs to hear it, you are not too much. You are not too far gone. You are not irredeemable. You are seen. You are worthwhile. You're worth experiencing healing. And no matter what you've been told, no matter what you've started to even believe, I want you to hear that your heart still matters. And there's room for you in your human story. So come closer, won't you, my dear listener? This bridge that I envision is already in progress, and I want you to cross it with me as we build it together.